We're going to start by just giving you some visibility of what the latest insights and benchmarks are telling us. And then the second half of the presentation is going to be about what we can do to beat those benchmarks, or what we're seeing the top performers are doing and how the rest of the sales team can follow suit.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. Every week, we'll be joined by revenue leaders from some of the most successful and highest growing companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys that they've been on, and the lessons they have learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by Ebsta. We're a revenue intelligence platform designed to help revenue teams to build more pipeline, close more deals, and retain more customers.
Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see all the names, if not faces, on the right-hand side of the screen that I'm looking at. My name's Adam. I run the commercial side of things here at Ebsta. I'm here today with my illustrious CEO. I'm sure some of you will recognize Guy from the various speaking events from LinkedIn. He's got quite the profile. But we're here today to talk about the insights that Ebsta's been able to gain, having analyzed billions and billions of dollars worth of pipeline over the last 12, 24 months. Hopefully able to add a ton of value and also give you some context as to, what we're seeing in the industry. So without further ado, I will hand over to Mr. Rubin.
Thanks very much, Adam, and really excited about today's event. Thank you all for joining. I know we've got some dialing in through LinkedIn Live. First time I've dialed LinkedIn Live, so welcome to you guys and welcome to everybody who's joined through the meeting link. So today most of you will be aware of some of the benchmarking we've been doing over the last couple of years. We've got a slightly different presentation today where we're going to be talking about how you can beat those benchmarks. So we probably need to start by explaining where are we, what are the benchmarks at the moment. And so I'm going to split the presentation into two halves. We're going to start by just giving you some visibility of what the latest insights and benchmarks are telling us. And then the second half of the presentation is going to be about what we can do to beat those benchmarks, or what we're seeing the top performers are doing and how the rest of the sales team can follow suit. So before we jump into all of that, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Guy Rubin. I'm the CEO, founder of a company called Ebsta. I'm also the CEO ambassador for Pavilion. So if you're not already a Pavilion member and you'd like to know more about it, please reach out to me. And of course, if you'd like to find out more about Ebsta, I'd be happy to hear from you as well through LinkedIn. Let me just do a very brief summary of what Ebsta is. We present Ebsta as an AI-first revenue platform. And what that means is for the sales reps on the ground, we present Ebsta as an AI-guided selling platform. So this is about prompting the sales reps as to what they should be doing next and following best practice. We help RevOps managers and sales managers identify risk in the pipeline sooner. So instead of walking into pipeline review meetings and talking about, tell me about this deal, what do I need to know? All of the information is delivered inside Salesforce, inside HubSpot, so you can actually see what's going really well on opportunities, but also see what needs attention. And then for leaders, we deliver an AI forecast. And so all of that rolls up to our brand guarantees. We have 3 of them. Number 1, we guarantee to improve rep quota attainment within the first 6 months. And we'll talk a bit more about how we do that later. We guarantee to improve forecast accuracy for the sales team. So we'll get you within 10% of your number. And we guarantee to get you live in 30 days. So it's very light touch to get Ebsta rolled out and integrated into Salesforce or HubSpot. So let's talk about the insights before we jump into how we beat the benchmarks. Let's understand what the benchmarks are. So in the last year, we've analyzed over 4.7 million opportunities across over 500 businesses. That represents over $57 billion worth of pipeline. We also, for the very first time this year, we analyzed 1.2 million hours of sales calls as well to really get under the skin of how the top performers are dealing with objections and discovery calls versus the rest of our sales teams. Now, at this point, what I'd say is if you've got questions as we go through the dashboards and the slideshow, please put them in the chat and hopefully Adam will join us and jump in on any specific questions as they come up. But do throw them in the chat and we'll pick them up as we can. So before we talk about where we are today, let's talk about what the numbers look like at the beginning of the years. The B2B benchmark report that perhaps a lot of you already downloaded at the beginning of the year in January, what we saw was that in the previous 12 months, we saw win rates drop quite dramatically. We saw deal values drop as well and sales cycles increase. So 2023 was a really tough year for most. Rep quota attainment was really quite low. So 69% of reps were missing quota. We saw this delta between the top performers and the rest of our sales team increase to nearly 9 times. And slippage was a big issue. We were seeing nearly half of deals were slipping past their anticipated close dates. So that was the state of the market as we entered 2024. And so as we move into 2024 and look at the first half of the year, we were really quite surprised by how big the delta, how much had changed. So we decided to run the report again. And as we look at the data for the first half of the year, it doesn't make very pretty reading. So that this delta between those top and bottom performers had grown even further. So we see it at over 10x now in what we call velocity. With just a quarter of A's now hitting quota in the first half of the year. And deal slippage has actually reduced quite dramatically, but that doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story. So sales team's performance of the first half of the year was really challenging. So as we dive into those numbers in a bit more detail, what we see is that average sales cycles actually increased in the first 6 months of the year, and win rates had dropped as well. But there is some good news here. We saw deal values increase again. So when we look at the data, we can see that at the end of last year, there was almost a fire sale going on in technology sales businesses. Deals were being cut at all sorts of prices just to get them over the line. And it feels like there's a lot more resilience in our pricing over the first 6 months of this year. So average deal values have increased by 7%. We can also see that the volume of deals slipped has dropped quite dramatically over the first 6 months, but that doesn't tell us the whole story. When we look at the deal slippage, when we try and understand the number in a bit more detail, what we can see is that in the first quarter, we let nearly 10% of our reps go, right? So the AEs that weren't performing in 2023, we saw 9% of those reps being moved on in the first quarter. And my gut feel when we looked at the numbers is that slippage actually increased slightly in the first quarter. But then when we got rid of the AEs that weren't performing, we can see that their pipeline was probably removed as well because it wasn't real. And so we saw that slippage number drop dramatically. Now, in the second quarter of this year, we saw that the volume of reps actually increased. So a big recruitment drive in the second quarter. So our sales teams actually grew by 18%. Now, we've not seen those deals flush through yet. So we're not necessarily seeing the impact on slippage here either. So we're in this kind of situation where most technology businesses missed their number in 2023. We can see that from the Quota Attainment numbers. They reduced their quota in 2023. Their targets were actually reduced at the end of last year. So to try and give the sales team something to kind of celebrate, it looks like the quotas were actually dropped quite dramatically at the end of last year. But then as we entered 2024, we couldn't keep the quotas at that low. And we've seen quota targets increase by over a third in the first half of the year. So we've got this situation where we missed our numbers in 2023. We gave the sales team a bit of a break at the end of last year. We've reintroduced high quota targets for the team. We can see that sales velocity has dropped again. And what we've done is spent a lot of money building more pipeline. So we've created lots more pipeline for the sales teams to go after because we missed our target last year. We know what our conversion rates happened to be last year. And we just assume that, well, if we spend more on marketing, generate a load more leads, we'll hire a load more salespeople. And that's the way we're going to hit our target this year. I wish it was as simple as that. But as we dump into the numbers, we'll see that's not necessarily the case. So in the first half of this year, we see ourselves in a place where just 16% of our reps are contributing over 80% of our revenue. So there's a huge delta now where our top performers are almost hold the business to ransom because they're outperforming the rest of our sales teams by such a margin. And this delta between those top performers that are consistently hitting their numbers and everybody else in the sales team is just getting wider and wider. So what can we do about it? Well, I really like this quote we put here at the top. I'm not quite sure who the philosopher is. Maybe someone in the audience can tell me, but we are doomed to repeat the past if we don't make a change. So if we can't remember what happened, we're just doomed to repeat it. And so this whole idea of, well, we'll just spend more on marketing, hire a load more reps, and it'll all be fine. I suspect we're going to be facing similar challenges this year as we did last. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm really going to focus on what we can do to replicate the success of those top performers, the 25% of reps that are hitting quota. Now, before we go any further, we've got a few very quick questions for the community. So we're going to pop those up on your screen and hopefully you'll be able to see a quick little survey popping up. And let's see if that comes up. So we'd love you to tell us, just keen to understand from the people that are here today, what CRM are you using? We'd also love to know, I think the second question we're going to bring up as well is asking you how many salespeople you've got in your sales team. That'd be really helpful to know as well. And then finally, I think the final question relates to investment in AI for your sales team. So just keen to understand, are you already investing in AI for your sales team? Is it something you're thinking about, or is it something you're not considering? We're going to jump into the second part of the presentation now. So hopefully you managed to have a chance to answer those questions. Okay, so what we're going to now focus on is what are we seeing those top performers do at each stage of this sales cycle? How are they attacking the market differently to the rest of our sales team? And the first area to focus on, I think, is around ICP. So when we look at the data, what we can see clearly is that our win rates are over 3 times higher when we're selling to ICP. Now, the challenge when we look at the data is that we've seen a massive increase in the volume of inbound leads because of the amount of money we're spending on marketing. But the volume of leads that we're working that represent ICP really hasn't changed. And so when we look at the pipeline coming through, just 18% of opportunities now match ICP. So in essence, what we've done is we've made the reps a whole lot busier. We've given them access to a lot more opportunities, but that doesn't necessarily mean those opportunities are the right opportunities for them to work. And the top performers are much better at really identifying which opportunities to spend time on. So I would encourage you to really try and get under the skin of what ICP actually means for your business. Now, this is an example of some of the data points that we deliver through Ebsta. So what we're trying to identify ICP, we build leaderboards of the AEs, really trying to understand, number one, which ICP segment each of the AEs seems to do really well at. So the chances are you don't just have one ICP, you might have a number of segments that you're working on. And knowing which AEs work really well with different particular segments is a really good thing to understand so that we can funnel the right leads to the right AE. We then need to be really ruthless about the top performers are a lot more ruthless about which personas they're engaging with at those prospects as they come through. And you'll see that the top performers are consistently engaging with much more senior contacts than the rest of the sales team and much earlier in the sales cycle as well. And then finally, really getting the marketing and sales teams aligned on what matches ICP, making sure that we're both targeting the same types of prospects. Because what we don't want is marketing thinking ICP is X and the sales team thinking it's Y. Now, the data will tell us what a good customer looks like. So make sure you're doing the analysis. And this is a really good example of the kind of data points you should be looking at to understand what ICP matches. So once we've identified watching the right opportunities, the next thing is focus on qualification. So what we see consistently is the top performers are over 3 times more likely to use some sort of methodology when they're doing their qualification. Now, they may not be recording it in the CRM. We've seen that's been a massive challenge, actually, and not just getting the reps to actually do the qualification, but getting them to record the fact they've done it as well is another big challenge. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the top performers are ruthless in their qualification. In fact, we are seeing consistently that the top performers are closing 30% of their opportunities off as lost at that discovery phase. So slightly counterintuitive because as sales leaders, we're trying to make sure that the sales reps had enough pipeline to hit their quota number. But actually, what we really want to be doing is encouraging them to close off that 30% of opportunities at that discovery phase. Now, that can be quite difficult if they don't have enough pipeline to work on. So encouraging them to use a qualification methodology is absolutely key. And we're still seeing that over 2/3 of deals move past the qualification stage without being qualified correctly. So it's the quickest thing you can do to actually have a big impact on win rates. And it's hidden because deals that close lost at the later stages, the chances are the reason they close lost is actually not of what happened in that stage, but it's the fact that they were never really qualified in the first place correctly. Okay, so now we've understood that we need to qualify. So how do we do it? So what I've done here is we've given you a few examples of the way we do it here at Ebsta. So the first thing we need to do is pick a methodology. Now, for what it's worth, it doesn't seem to make a big difference as to which methodology you use. Try and keep it as simple as you possibly can, but try and have everybody doing it in a consistent format. So if you're using Medic or Bant or Spiced or MedPick, whichever methodology you choose to use, get it into your systems and get them using it consistently. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the big challenges is actually getting people to capture that information. But the good news is AI can do that a whole lot more consistently than the sales reps can themselves. So plugging something like Ebsta into all of your previous call recordings, whether you're using a Gong or a Zoom or a Teams, it doesn't really matter. But we want access to those call recordings so that we can analyze them and auto-populate into Salesforce or into HubSpot the qualification methodology. And we can actually score it so that you can actually set a gate or a trigger in place to say, look, you don't get to leave discovery unless you hit a certain number of points in the way you qualified the customer. And the rep only needs 1 or 2 red thumbs downs before they decide to do a better job at the way they do their qualification. Adam, have you had any experience in this area? What are your thoughts on this? You're on mute.
Of course I'm on mute. Standard practice. Yeah, I was just going to say, look, one of the tough things about driving adoption of any methodology that you use, whether it's a sales methodology or other frameworks, it's about making it visible and easy for everybody to align to. I think one of the big takeaways from using Ebsta, personally, and what I've seen through other customers is that ability to drive everybody in the organization automatically has eyes on that how well qualified is every single opportunity. And it locks leaders into helping their reps become better that are struggling with qualification. It highlights risk so that when that comes to forecasting, when that comes to submitting, your predictions for the quarter and for the month, depending on how you forecast, you really have much more visibility, much more data, much more insight to be able to make better decisions quicker. And I think that's one of the biggest things that Ebsta provides.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, look, the key here is that salespeople have got a very limited capacity for learning. And the mistake we keep making is encouraging them, is using that limited capacity for learning to teach them things that AI can do better than they can. And this is a great example of that. The AI can't build a relationship with your prospect. The AI can't ask the right questions. But what it can do is when the questions have been asked, it can extract that information. It can identify all the objections that the customer raised on the call, and it can put it into fields in Salesforce or HubSpot and allow you to then report on it. So that consistency just changes the dynamic with the way that we analyze what's going well in the sales calls and with the customers and prospects. Okay, so the next thing that we see has a big impact on win rates is engaging with the C-levels and engaging with them early. One of the key mistakes you can see here on the low performers is that they wait until much later in the sales process to get engagement with the right stakeholders. The other thing you can see here is, so it's not only is the top performers engaging with the C-suite much earlier in the sales process, but they're also able to get a lot more engagement with those C-levels. Now, at this point, it's worth understanding, at Ebsta, we score every relationship your business has, even if they've never made it into your CRM. So every contact anyone in the business has ever exchanged an email with or had a meeting with, we're going to build a profile for that contact, get that into Salesforce, and score the level of that relationship, the strength of that engagement. And so that allows us to do these types of reports where you can see here that the top performers are consistently getting a lot more engagement a lot earlier in the sales process. So we know that when we get a good example of this is we know that the win rates drop by 40% when we don't engage the C-levels until much later in the sales process. We also know from a positive perspective that in today's world, we have to get high levels of engagement with the finance persona in the sales process, and again, much earlier. So if you've got a finance persona, more often than not, we now all need to accept the fact that there is a finance persona we need to engage with, but don't wait until you're presenting back your solution to get them engaged. They want the same ROI as your buyer. And if you can get them on that journey sooner, then you're much more likely to close the deal. They're a key persona that you shouldn't forget, and they can be a key supporter if you get them on board early enough. So how do we do that here at Ebsta? Well, by analyzing, by fixing all the dirty data in Salesforce and all the opportunities that you've closed, won, and lost in the past, and putting all the contacts you engaged with on those opportunities back into the opportunity records that have closed in the past, we're then uniquely placed to do the analysis. We can understand specifically which personas we should be engaging with each stage of the sales cycle to achieve the best outcome. And we can then coach the reps as to which personas or how multi-threaded they need to be every stage of the sales cycle. Now, if you're not reporting on this information, then you're applying blind. So coaching and training those reps on focusing on the right personas at the right stage of the sales process is absolutely key. Automating the scoring and the mapping of those relationships into the opportunity means that the rep no longer has any admin to do. And so you as a leader have full visibility of what they actually need to learn or who they should be engaging with. And then including in the gates and triggers that move opportunities from one stage to the next, include specific personas that you want the team to have engagement with. In Ebsta, for example, we insist that the sales team have at least one commercial leader plus a C-level actively engaged before they're allowed to move forward through the rest of the sales process. So work out which personas are key to you and which ones have the best positive impact on win rates. Now, understanding the objections that are being raised is absolutely key. And what's really interesting is looking at the way top performers deal with those objections differently to the rest of our sales teams. So the top performers are actively leaning into the objections around ROI, for example. We know that if ROI isn't discussed until the later stages, our win rates are 2/3 lower. So the top performers are discussing ROI much earlier in the sales cycle. Even in the discovery phase, they're talking to the customer about, look, I know you've got 7 other projects on right now. Where does this sit in your priorities? Are you expecting, what kind of ROI are you expecting on this project? If we can deliver that, is it a high enough priority for us to actually go through this process together? And so it becomes a consensus, and the top performers are perceived as expert advisors by their buyers rather than just an annoying salesperson. So I mentioned earlier this idea that the sales team have got very limited capacity for learning. Let's use that limited capacity for learning, not to teach them how to do the admin that the AI can do better than they can, but instead use that to focus on training them on how to deal with objections. So when we look at how we do it here at Ebsta, we automate the capture of the objections from the call recordings and we populate those into Salesforce fields or perhaps into deal rooms in Slack so that you're able to see and collate all of the objections that the customers are raising in a consistent format. And you can start to see a specific type of objection starts to increase where we might need to do a bit more training, for example. So again, if you're not seeing it, if you're not capturing it, if you're not reporting on it, it's very difficult to have a positive impact on it. So really important to pick out what objections are being raised and when. Adam, you got something to share on this one?
Yeah, I think the insights are really, really powerful, but it's how we use the insights, right? And as you can see by making, using Slack channels, using, clip and share, we've made it very, very easy for people to get the right information into the right hands of others in the organization. Everyone's very, very busy, but, in a click of a button or a share of an automated trigger inside Slack, I can pull Guy into a deal. And I think there's a question that's popped up in the chat, which is what are the differences in practices and tactics that allow top performers to engage at C-level much earlier? From my experience and the way that we run in Ebsta, my best reps have a direct line to Guy and have a direct line to me. And they're constantly asking, how can we use senior relationships across the organization to drive engagement and help, broker introductions and, facilitate conversations. And that's one thing that we do that's sort of tactical, but it's about, having the insight and the, from a rep point of view, being the quarterback, using the information that Ebsta's giving you, and then networking internally to broker the right conversations and use the relationships that the senior leadership that tend to have. So I just thought I'd drop in and add that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So yeah, use your own C-levels to engage with the customer's C-levels. That's always a good idea. But ultimately, you own your sales process. And if you're not allowed to move to the next stage or invest time with your solution engineers or your finance or legal departments until you've got certain levels of buy-in, then of course, you're in a position where you can insist upon it and explain, look, this is our process. We know this is the right way to go. So, can we find a way of getting these individuals engaged? And I think as long as you explain that to the customer, there's always a good way of trying to get them to agree to effectively a buying plan or a close plan that has buy-in from specific stakeholders as we go. Okay, so moving into the next phase, one of the things we all recognize is that time kills all deals. But it's really important to understand the influence of slippage on your specific pipeline. And it may well be different for different types of deals that you're working on. So SMB, mid-market, or enterprise will have a massive different impact, or different ticket size products. Time might have a different impact on those win rates. But really understanding is absolutely key. We had a customer recently where when deals slipped past 12 weeks over their anticipated close date, the win rate was down to less than 2%. But they had over 100 opportunities that had slipped that far. And because they didn't know that the win rates were that low, they continue to allow the reps to have them in their pipeline. So it's really important to understand the impact of slippage on win rates for your specific business. As a generic response, we can see that once deals slip up to 4 weeks, between 1 and 4 weeks, the average deal win rates will decline by a third, which is kind of acceptable. But once they slip on average, once deals slip past a month, you're going to lose 2/3 of those opportunities, or the win rate drops by 2/3. So really understand the influence of time on win rates is absolutely key to this exercise. And that really comes down to the way we do our pipeline reviews. And I know Adam spends a lot of time doing these pipeline review meetings. But really important that we have a consistent approach to pipeline reviews. And this idea of walking into a pipeline review meeting and just going, right, tell me about your deals, that doesn't serve anybody. Because number one, the rep is just going to talk about the stuff that's going well, and that doesn't help us. And number two, you're just going to hear, it's just going to be a narrative of kind of what their perception of the deal is. And what we really need to do is just get into the data. And so we need to have a much more consistent process and compare consistent performance metrics on every opportunity. And the beauty of our approach to this is the AI auto extracts from the calls, the meetings, and the email activity where the risks are on the opportunity. So instead of just talking about the deal in random, you can actually get specifics on, look, here are the examples of the things that are going really well on this opportunity. And here are the things that are not going as well as we'd expect them to when a deal closes one. And so by having that specific information available at your fingertips, your pipeline reviews are now 10x more powerful. And that consistency will give you what you need. So knowing, for example, a deal has been in stage too long, or we are not multi-threaded enough, or don't have enough engagement with a particular persona, all of that means that we can actually encourage the sales team to do what they need to. And ultimately, if they have to, close the deal off as lost sooner. Adam, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think certainly from my point of view, it's really about it from a leadership standpoint, looking across, hundreds of opportunities a month or a quarter, it's about being able to manage your risk better. There's going to be a portion of your pipeline that moves through to close beautifully. There's going to be a portion that, stutters as it might go through the quarter. The stuff that's really important, the high value deals where there's actually tons of risk, you have all that visibility early doors. That not only does that help you close off deals and get your reps focused on deals that are likely to close quicker, but it also helps you prevent forecasting, nightmares and forecasting, committing big deals that actually, because you've listened to the rep and heard a great story, a great narrative about why this deal's going to close, when you dig into the data pretty quickly, it's clear to see that, we're not engaging with the economic buyer. We haven't got a meeting, but the relationship score's gone down and down. And actually that's not a commit deal. In fact, it shouldn't even be in the pipeline.
Yeah. Time and stage is another great one. Knowing the average time and stage when you win versus the current time and stage is a great metric to kind of use as a benchmark as well. So yeah, having access to this data is absolutely key if you're going to start scaling the sales team as we go. So what does it actually look like in practice? Well, here's an example of a case study, just 3 slides here that I think you're going to find useful. So we went into this organization. There was a delta of 4x between their top and bottom performers. Just 1 in 5 reps was hitting quota. Their win rates were down at 12%. Average sales cycle was too long, and the forecast accuracy was just nowhere it needed to be. So we put Ebsta live, and there's some interesting kind of data points here that I'm going to walk you through very quickly. So the first thing we understood is that in their business model, relationships drove revenue. So introducing this engagement score as a way of understanding where the relationships were strong was absolutely key. So when we back historically, what we could see is that the average level of engagement on opportunities was just 67 out of 100. But when the engagement was above 80, their win rates were 6 times higher. Now, once we showed this to the sales team in kind of picture format and then put this engagement score on the opportunity record in Salesforce, just within 3 months, their average level of engagement had jumped from 67 to 83. And so their win rates really dramatically increased. So the sales team wanted to win, they just didn't understand how important engagement was as a data point. Now, relationships was also key, so how multi-threaded they were. On average, historically, we saw that they only had 3 stakeholders actively involved in the sales cycle. But when they had 6 or more, their win rates were twice as high. And guess what? By showing this to the sales team, after just 3 months, average number of stakeholders actively engaged in the sales process increased to 6. For this particular business, the persona of VP of Operations was absolutely key as a champion, had a big impact on win rates. We can see win rates were 4 times higher when they had that as their champion, but only 8% of their opportunities had that persona actively engaged. What we saw after just 3 months, 23% of opportunities had that particular persona actively engaged at the early stages. And then finally, introducing this auto capture of MedPick for them through the call intelligence product allowed us to reduce the sales cycle and reduce slippage. And all of that led to this kind of before and after view of the leaderboard. So the top performers really didn't move dramatically, but you can see here very quickly that the B and C players had stepped up very, very quickly. So because they've got this drive to win, by showing them, by unlocking the data, by showing them what good looks like, we saw the delta between those top and bottom performers shrunk dramatically. The quota attainment went up, their win rates went up, and the sales cycle was reduced. And all of that led to this almost a 50% increase in what we call velocity or dollars per day. So this comes back to those brand guarantees we talked about earlier. So this is how we guarantee to increase quota attainment for the reps and help you hit that forecast accuracy number that everyone's after. But ultimately, this is the case study that we came off the back of it. Again, you can find that on our website when you get a chance. But we had a big impact, and that as a business has really introduced this and embraced this data-driven approach, and it's having a big impact on their growth. And if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, that would be great. Always happy to have conversations about data and sales-driven insights. So happy to answer any additional questions if any have come up, to have a quick look. So ask any questions now if you've got any. Otherwise, anything else from your side, Adam?
No, you can also find me on LinkedIn. We will be in touch. Me, my team will be in touch with those that joined after the event. It's been a pleasure. I don't see any questions for us to tackle right now, Guy. But
okay, well, we're going to be doing a series of these. So we're going to pick up a different set of insights for the next one. It's going to be in October. So we'll reach out to everybody about the next session. Hopefully you enjoyed today. I'd love any feedback that you've got, whether it's in the chat or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Welcome the feedback so that we can try and make these better each time. I'm going to be running a series of these to the end of the year. So hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights. If you want to learn more, subscribe to our newsletter and we'll deliver every episode straight to your inbox. If you have any questions, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Our links will be in the episode notes. See you next week.